All right, so you sent over a bunch of notes about startup success. Or should I say startup misconceptions?
Right.
This excerpt about common myths is really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Get ready to rethink some of those classic assumptions.
Okay.
Because apparently groundbreaking ideas are more common than we think. That
Hmm.
first product doesn't have to be perfect.
Right.
And even the most successful startups sometimes make a big pivot.
Absolutely.
We're going to unpack all of that and more in this deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
By the end of this, you'll have a much better understanding of what it really takes to build a successful startup, even if you've never considered yourself an entrepreneur.
I'm excited to debunk some of these myths.
Okay, so first up, this source claims that most people have at least 20 genuinely good business ideas in their lifetime.
At least.
20. Seriously.
Yeah.
I don't even have 20 ideas for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are good ideas really that abundant?
What's fascinating here is that ideas themselves are often the easy part. Think about it. You encounter problems and potential solutions every day, probably without even realizing it.
Yeah, that's true.
It's the execution that taking action that separates a fleeting thought from a successful venture.
So it's less about having that one aha moment
Right.
and more about what you do with it, right?
Exactly.
But how do you even begin to execute on an idea in this fast-paced startup world?
That's where the lean startup methodology comes in.
Okay.
Instead of getting bogged down in traditional business plans, which
Okay.
can be outdated before they're even finished,
Right.
this approach is built around the idea of a build, measure, learn feedback loop.
Okay. Build, measure, learn. It's got a nice ring to it.
Yeah.
But what does it actually look like in practice?
Imagine a startup trying to create a new fitness app.
Okay.
They could spend months perfecting every feature.
Uh-huh.
But what if users actually want something different?
Yeah, that's a good point.
The lean startup approach encourages them to build a basic version of the app focusing on the core value proposition. Maybe just a workout tracker and community forum.
Got it.
Then they get that MVP, that minimum viable product, into the hands of real users.
Yeah.
Measure how they interact with it and use that feedback to inform the next iteration.
So it's all about getting that real-world feedback
Precisely.
and using it to shape the product.
And this brings us to another important point.
Okay.
Customers often can't articulate what they want until they see it.
That makes sense.
Asking directly, what kind of fitness app do you want, might not give you reliable data.
Right. They might not even know.
People might say they want feature X, but their actions within the app could show you feature Y is way more valuable.
That makes a lot of sense.
So observation is key.
But if we're talking about testing and experimenting,
Mm-hmm.
how do you even get started with that first build phase?
Right.
This excerpt mentioned a few different types of MVPs,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the examples are pretty wild.
Yeah.
Dropbox, for example, launched with just a video, right?
It's amazing what you can achieve with a bit of ingenuity.
For sure.
Dropbox created a video demonstrating the functionality of their product before they even had a fully functional product.
So they were showing off something that didn't even exist yet.
They were showcasing the potential.
Wow.
This generated a ton of buzz and gave them a wait list of eager users.
So they validated the demand before they even built the product.
Exactly.
Talk about building anticipation.
Right.
That video MVP approach almost feels like a movie trailer getting people excited for the main event.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
What are some of the other ways startups can test their assumptions without building a fully fledged product?
Well, we have the concierge MVP,
Okay.
which is about providing a highly personalized hands-on service to your early users.
So it's like being a personal assistant for your product.
Think of it like a personal shopper for your product.
Okay.
Let's say you have an idea for a meal planning app.
Right.
Instead of building the entire app up front, you could manually curate meal plans for a small group of users.
So you're doing the work behind the scenes to test the concept.
Gathering feedback on their preferences and pain points.
Makes sense.
This allows you to deeply understand your target audience and tailor your product accordingly before investing in expensive development.
So it's all about getting that direct, personalized feedback from your earliest users,
Right.
even if it means doing things manually at first.
It's about getting that validation.
It reminds me of those early online stores that were just one person packing and shipping orders from their garage,
Exactly.
starting small and scrappy.
And then there's the Wizard of Oz MVP.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's called that because, like the wizard in this story, you're creating an illusion of a fully functional product when behind the scenes things are being operated manually.
Give me an example.
Sure.
How do you fake it till you make it in the startup world?
A classic example is Aardvark, a question and answer service.
Okay.
Early on, they didn't have the technology to automatically match users with experts, so they did it manually.
Wow. So users thought they were interacting with a sophisticated system.
That's the idea.
Right. But it was all powered by humans behind the curtain.
Users thought they were interacting with a sophisticated algorithm, when in reality, a team of humans was diligently routing questions and answers behind the scenes.
That's incredible.
This allowed them to validate their concept and gather data to refine their algorithm before investing in complex technology.
That's brilliant.
It's about being resourceful.
It seems like choosing the right type of MVP depends a lot on the nature of the product and the hypothesis you're trying to test.
Absolutely.
But once you have something people want, how do you scale?
Right.
How do you go from a promising idea to a thriving business?
That's where understanding the engines of growth becomes crucial.
Okay. Engines of growth.
Essentially, there are three main ways startups can fuel their expansion:
Let's hear it.
the sticky engine, the viral engine, and the paid engine.
All right, let's unpack these engines.
Let's do it.
The sticky engine sounds like it's all about creating loyal customers who keep coming back for more, right?
You've got it.
Okay, so if I'm addicted to that meditation app with the cute sleep stories, that's the sticky engine working its magic.
Exactly.
But what about going viral?
Sure.
That seems like the holy grail for many startups.
It can be powerful.
How does the viral engine work?
The viral engine leverages the power of word of mouth and network effects to achieve rapid exponential growth.
Word of mouth on steroids.
You could say that.
So like that ice bucket challenge that took over social media a few years back.
It's a great example.
It seemed like everyone was dumping buckets of ice water on themselves for a good cause.
You nailed it.
But going viral seems like it involves a bit of luck, catching the right cultural wave at the right time.
There's definitely an element of timing involved.
What about the paid engine?
Okay.
Is that just a fancy way of saying advertising?
The paid engine is about using advertising strategically to acquire new customers.
So it's not just about throwing money at ads.
It's about being smart with your budget.
You need to make sure your ad spend is actually generating a positive return on investment.
It's ugly that you're not spending more to attract customers than they'll ultimately spend with you.
You got it.
This all makes me wonder, how do startups decide which engine of growth to prioritize?
That's a good question.
Is it a case of picking one and sticking with it? Or can you leverage multiple engines at once?
That's a great question, and the answer depends on a variety of factors,
Okay.
such as the nature of the product, the target market, and available resources.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all.
Some startups might find that a sticky engine is perfect for building a loyal customer base early on, while others might leverage a viral campaign to generate initial buzz.
Right.
And as they grow, they might incorporate paid strategies to further expand their reach.
Exactly.
It's all about finding the right mix for your specific circumstances.
It's about being adaptable.
It seems like building a successful startup is a constant process of experimenting, analyzing, and adapting.
It is a constant evolution.
And speaking of adapting, this excerpt you sent mentions this concept of pivoting. Yes, pivoting is essential.
It sounds like knowing when to change course is just as crucial as perseverance.
Absolutely. Even with the best laid plans and a validated MVP,
Hello?
sometimes the initial assumptions are off base.
It happens.
Pivoting is about recognizing those moments and making strategic shifts to improve your chances of success.
So it's not about giving up on your dream, it's about evolving it.
Exactly. Think of it like this.
Okay.
You're on a road trip and you realize the map you're using is outdated. You wouldn't keep driving in the wrong direction, right?
No, of course not.
You'd consult a new map, adjust your route, and get back on track.
That's a great analogy.
So pivoting is about course correction.
But how do you know when it's time to pivot?
That's the million-dollar question.
Are there any warning signs that your current path isn't leading you in the right direction?
Well, the source outlines a pretty clear process.
Okay.
First, you establish a baseline with your MVP.
Got it.
Then you run experiments and iterations to see if you can move the needle on your key metrics.
So you're looking for measurable progress, evidence that your efforts are actually moving you closer to your goals.
Precisely if, despite your best efforts, you're not seeing significant progress. It might be time to consider a pivot.
It sounds like data-driven decision-making is key here.
Data is your friend.
You're not just pivoting on a whim, you're letting the data guide your decisions.
Exactly. Data should inform your choices.
But what are some common types of pivots?
Sure.
What aspects of a startup can be adjusted when things aren't working as planned?
There are several ways to pivot,
Okay.
and it's often a combination of factors.
Right.
You might realize that the customer segment you initially targeted isn't the right fit.
So the problem isn't the product itself, it's who you're trying to sell it to.
Exactly.
A classic example of this is Slack.
Interesting example.
It started as an internal communication tool for a gaming company.
Yeah, they stumbled upon something bigger.
Wait, Slack wasn't always the go-to collaboration platform for businesses?
Not at all.
They quickly realized that their product had broader appeal. So they pivoted their target market, focusing on businesses and teams of all sizes.
It was a smart move.
That's incredible. And they certainly found the right market, didn't they?
They did.
What are some other ways startups can pivot?
Sometimes the pivot involves changing your monetization strategy.
Okay, so you're essentially figuring out how to make money from your product in a way that makes sense for both you and your customers.
Exactly. A great example of this is YouTube.
YouTube, okay.
It started as a dating site, believe it or not.
Wow, seriously?
Yeah, it's a funny story looking back.
YouTube was a dating site.
It seems like they were a long way off from cat videos and makeup tutorials back then.
They certainly were.
But they quickly realized that the video sharing aspect of their platform had enormous potential.
So they saw the opportunity and shifted gears.
They pivoted their monetization strategy, introducing advertising and eventually becoming the video sharing giant we know today.
It's amazing how these companies were able to recognize that their initial concept, while it might have been a good starting point, wasn't fully aligned with the market's needs and demands.
They were willing to adapt.
And by being willing to pivot, they unlocked incredible success.
It's about recognizing when to change course.
It really highlights the importance of staying flexible and being willing to adapt your approach.
Flexibility is key in the startup world.
This has been so insightful.
I'm glad you're finding it helpful.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from debunking the myth of the unique idea to understanding the power of the MVP and the different engines of growth.
It's a lot to take in.
Exactly. But I think one of the most important takeaways here is that successful startups aren't just about having a great idea.
Right.
They're about embracing the unknown, it's experimenting and constantly learning and adapting along the way.
It's a journey of continuous improvement.
It sounds both exhilarating and a little terrifying at the same time, to be honest.
It's definitely a roller coaster ride.
So for our listener out there who might be brimming with ideas, but unsure how to take that first step,
Okay.
what would be your biggest piece of advice?
Don't get hung up on perfection.
Well,
Don't wait for that perfect idea or the perfect time.
just get started.
Start small, experiment, validate your assumptions, and iterate your way to something amazing.
Embrace the loop, as they say.
Exactly.
And remember those 20 brilliant ideas you supposedly have?
Don't let them gather dust.
Don't let them go to waste.
Who knows, maybe one of them is your next big adventure waiting to happen.
I love that. Now, this excerpt focused on the early stages of building a startup,
Yeah, the foundational stuff.
but it's got me thinking, what happens after you've found success?
Interesting question.
How do you maintain that momentum and continue to grow?
That's a challenge many successful startups face.
It's like you've climbed the mountain, planted your flag at the summit. Now what?
Right, what's next?
Do you just set up camp and admire the view?
Not if you want to stay ahead of the game.
The business landscape is constantly shifting.
It's always evolving.
So even established companies need to stay agile and adapt to remain relevant.
Adaptability is key to long-term success.
That's where the principles of the lean startup, that willingness to experiment and iterate, become even more important.
Absolutely.
It's not a one-and-done kind of thing.
It's a continuous process.
Building a successful company is a marathon, not a sprint.
I like that analogy.
It requires constant learning, adaptation, and a willingness to embrace change.
That's all about growth.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into the world of startups.
So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
We've debunked some common myths, explored the power of the MVP, and learned how to fuel growth with different engines.
It's been a great discussion.
And hopefully you've gained a new perspective on what it really takes to build a successful business.
Whether you're just starting out or you've been at it for a while.
Exactly. And remember that idea you might have dismissed?
Uh-huh.
The one that seemed too crazy or too ambitious?
I've got a few of those myself.
Maybe it's time to dust it off. Give it a lean startup makeover and see where it takes you.
Don't be afraid to explore those ideas.
If you could build an MVP today, what would it be?
Now, that's something to think about.
And which engine of growth would you focus on?
Those are great questions to ponder as you continue exploring the world of startups.
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely.
Share your MVP ideas and growth strategies with us on social media using hashtag #TheDeepDive.
We'll be looking out for your ideas.
Until next time, keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep diving deep.
See you next time. It's interesting you brought up the paid engine.
Yeah.
Because even within that category,
Uh-huh.
there are so many nuances to consider.
Okay.
You mentioned Google AdWords,
Right.
which is a great example of reaching people actively searching for solutions.
Makes sense.
But what if your product is so new
Yeah.
or niche
Yeah.
that people don't even know to search for it yet?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Like, how do you advertise something
Right.
people don't even know they need?
Exactly.
It feels like you'd almost have to create the need first, right?
Sometimes that's exactly what startups have to do.
Mm.
It's where things like influencer marketing and social media campaigns can be really effective.
Oh,
They can help introduce your product to a wider audience,
got it.
generate buzz, and spark that initial interest.
So it's almost like planting seeds of awareness first,
Uh-huh.
nurturing that interest, and then as the market becomes more familiar with your product,
Yeah.
you can start leveraging those more targeted paid strategies.
It's a multifaceted approach,
Okay.
and it ties back to what we were talking about earlier, the
Mhm.
importance of constantly experimenting and adapting.
Right.
You might start with one strategy,
Yeah.
see how it performs, and then
Mhm.
adjust your approach based on the data.
It's like that build, make, or learn loop,
Exactly.
but applied to marketing and growth.
Right.
Exactly.
And that brings us to another crucial aspect of startup success,
Okay.
the ability to pivot.
We touched on this earlier.
We did.
But I think it's worth delving deeper.
I agree.
You see, even with a validated MVP and a solid understanding of your growth engines,
Yeah.
sometimes the initial assumptions about your product or market are just plain wrong. And that's where the ability to recognize those moments
right.
and make a strategic shift becomes so important.
Precisely.
Pivoting isn't about giving up on your dream.
No.
It's about refining it, adapting it to the realities of the market.
Think of it like you're a sculptor,
Okay.
and you start with a block of clay.
Uh-huh.
You have a vision in mind.
Yeah.
But as you start to mold and shape the clay,
Mm.
you realize that maybe a slightly different form would be more beautiful,
Okay.
more impactful.
So you're not abandoning the art.
Not at all.
You're simply refining it based on what you're learning along the way.
Exactly.
But how do you know when it's time to make that shift?
Right.
Are there any telltale signs that your current path isn't leading you in the right direction?
That's a question every entrepreneur grapples with.
I bet.
It's a mix of data analysis,
Okay.
intuition, and sometimes a healthy dose of gut feeling.
Interesting.
But one of the key indicators is a lack of traction, despite your best efforts.
So you're putting in the work, you're iterating based on feedback, you're experimenting with different growth strategies.
Right.
But the needle just isn't moving.
Exactly. If you're not seeing significant progress towards your goals, despite your best efforts, it might be time to step back and assess whether a pivot is necessary.
Okay, so you've recognized the need for a pivot.
Right.
What are some common types of pivots?
Sure.
What aspects of a startup can be adjusted when things aren't working as planned?
There are several ways to pivot,
Okay.
and it's often a combination of factors.
Right.
You might realize that the customer segment you initially targeted isn't the right fit.
So the problem isn't the product itself.
Right.
It's who you're trying to sell it to.
Exactly. A classic example of this is Slack.
Slack, okay.
It started as an internal communication tool for a gaming company.
Wait, Slack wasn't always the go-to collaboration platform for businesses.
Not at all.
So they were kind of ahead of their time.
They quickly realized that their product had broader appeal.
Okay.
So they pivoted their target market, focusing on businesses and teams of all sizes.
That's incredible.
It was a smart move.
And they certainly found the right market, didn't they?
They did.
What are some other ways startups can pivot?
Sometimes the pivot involves changing your monetization strategy.
Okay.
You might start with one model and realize it's not sustainable,
Right.
or that there's a more effective way to generate revenue.
So you're essentially figuring out how to make money from your product in a way that makes sense for both you and your customers.
Exactly. A great example of this is YouTube.
YouTube, okay.
It started as a dating site, believe it or not.
Wow, seriously?
Yeah, it's true.
YouTube was a dating site.
It seems like they were a long way off from cat videos and makeup tutorials back then.
They certainly were.
But they quickly realized that the video sharing aspect of their platform had enormous potential.
So they saw the writing on the wall.
They pivoted their monetization strategy, introducing advertising, and eventually becoming the video sharing giant we know today.
It's amazing how these companies were able to recognize that their initial concept,
Right.
while it might have been a good starting point, wasn't fully aligned with the market's needs and demands.
And by being willing to pivot,
Right.
they unlocked incredible success.
It's a testament to the power of adaptability
It is.
and the importance of staying open to change,
Absolutely.
even when it means letting go of your initial vision.
But pivoting, even when it makes sense,
Yeah.
must be a difficult decision, right?
It must be.
I imagine it's tough to let go of that initial concept you poured your heart and soul into.
For sure.
It's not easy,
Right.
but it's often necessary for survival.
Yeah, I can see that.
Successful entrepreneurs understand that pivoting isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign of growth, a willingness to learn and adapt.
I like that.
And sometimes that pivot involves changing your entire product.
Really?
Yeah.
You mean completely scrapping what you've built and starting from scratch?
It's not always a complete overhaul,
Okay.
but sometimes it's the best course of action.
Do you have any examples of companies that have successfully pivoted their entire product?
Absolutely. A classic example is Flickr.
Flickr. Okay.
It started as an online role-playing game
Wow.
called Game Never Ending.
Flickr was a game.
That's a far cry from the photo-sharing platform we know and love today.
It is.
They realized that a photo-sharing feature they'd built into the game was gaining significant traction.
So they kind of stumbled upon a winning formula.
They made the bold decision to pivot their entire product,
Wow.
focusing solely on photo sharing.
It's incredible how these pivots often involve recognizing hidden gems within your initial concept.
Right?
It's like you're digging for gold and you stumble upon a vein of diamonds you didn't even know existed.
That's a great analogy.
And it highlights the importance of paying attention to user feedback
Yes.
and being open to unexpected opportunities.
Always be looking for those hidden gems.
So it's not just about sticking rigidly to your initial vision.
Right.
It's about being open to exploring new paths, even if they weren't part of the original plan.
And sometimes that new path leads you to even greater heights than you could have ever imagined.
These examples are truly inspiring.
They are.
They demonstrate that pivoting, while it can be challenging, can also be the key to unlocking extraordinary success.
It's about embracing the journey.
It's a powerful reminder that the journey of a startup is rarely a straight line.
It's full of twists and turns, unexpected obstacles, and moments of serendipitous discovery.
And it's the ability to navigate those twists and turns, to adapt and evolve along the way, that ultimately determines your success.
It's about being resilient.
It's about embracing the unknown, trusting your instincts, and always being willing to learn and grow.
Growth is the key.
It's fascinating to think that even companies like Slack, YouTube, and Flickr, which are now household names, started with completely different visions.
It really shows you that you don't always know where you'll end up.
It really underscores the point that success isn't always a straight line. It's more like a winding path with unexpected detours and scenic overlooks.
Yeah, you gotta enjoy the ride.
So if we were to distill all of this into one key takeaway,
Right.
for our listener, someone who might be on the cusp of their own startup adventure, what would it be?
I'd say embrace the unknown. Don't be afraid to challenge your assumptions, to experiment, to pivot when necessary. The beauty of the startup world is that it's a constant learning experience.
It's like one big experiment.
You're constantly iterating, refining, and adapting your approach based on what you learn along the way.
It's about being comfortable with that constant state of flux, knowing that the path to success is rarely a straight line.
And it's about surrounding yourself with people who share that mindset,
Yeah, for sure.
who are passionate about innovation and eager to embrace the challenges and triumphs of building something new.
This excerpt you shared has been so insightful in illuminating the path to startup success. It's not just about having a great idea, it's about the execution, the experimentation, and the ability to adapt and evolve.
And it's about remembering that success isn't a destination, it's a journey.
It's about constantly striving, learning, and growing, and finding joy in the process of creating something meaningful and impactful.
If there's one thing I hope our listener takes away from this deep dive, it's that the world of startups is full of possibilities. It's a place where innovation thrives, where ideas are transformed into reality, and where anyone with passion, determination, and a willingness to learn can make their mark.
So to our listener out there who might be harboring that next big idea, remember those 20 brilliant ideas you supposedly have. Don't let them go to waste.
Pick one. Start small experiment and see where it takes you. You might be surprised by what you discover along the way.
This deep dive has been packed with incredible insights and inspiration. We've debunked common myths, explored the power of MVPs, and learned how to fuel growth with different engines. We even took a detour into the art of pivoting, discovering how some of the most successful companies we know today started with completely different visions.
Hopefully it's giving you a lot to think about.
And hopefully you've gained a new perspective on what it really takes to build a successful business, whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting to explore your ideas.
If this deep dive has sparked your entrepreneurial spirit and you're ready to take the plunge, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Share your MVP ideas, your growth strategies, or just your general thoughts and takeaways with us on social media using #TheDeepDive.
And until next time, keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world around us.